Hey guys, Coach Gaglione here. This is another edition of the Powerlifting for the People podcast. We're going to continue our discussion on programming. We had some, I guess, great kind of feedback as well as just a good amount of views and downloads for our programming episode. So we're going to continue the trend a little bit, whether you're a coach or an athlete or you just want to kind of know the method behind the madness a little bit. Today we're going to talk about like kind of Westside, and I use that in quotes because unless you're at Westside, you're not really training Westside, but we kind of, when we talk about concurrent or kind of conjugate style programming, I typically will refer to that to the like a Westside style program or like a Westside conjugate method. That being said, just so you guys know, I have visited Louis many times. I do have all the Westside barbell VHS tapes. Been to kind of many seminars, with Matt Wenning and other kind of conjugate experts. And by no means would I say that what we do is complete conjugate, but we take a lot of conjugate principles. And I did, for about half of my career, I would say, so at least 6 years, I did a pretty strict kind of Westside kind of style template. We're going to also kind of go through some of the similarities, differences, and just how to tweak it. So what I want to do today for the first episode is just kind of go over a general overview of like what are some of the principles, and then also some exercise selection. And then in a future episode, we'll kind of go over the training week, and then potentially a training month as well, depending on how like long we go. But today we're going to talk about the methods and some of the exercise selection. And we're also going to talk about what are some of the differences between like a raw and equipped lifter, in my opinion, because sometimes people say there is no different, but I think there is actually a vast difference. And we do train, like I said, we've had a bunch of lifters compete both equipped and raw at the XPC finals. And again, so I have a lot of experience with myself, as well as other athletes training both raw and equipped, and I can kind of show you what we found has been successful in both those categories. And even raw with wraps is going to be some differences there. So number one, we want to go over the three kind of methods, and I think that was maybe Matt Rhodes, I think, was the first person to kind of describe this to me about Westside training, is that there's really three ways to get strong. Is you can lift something heavy, you can lift something fast, or you can kind of lift something for reps. So that's going to comprise like the three methods of concurrent training. So you have the maximal effort method, the dynamic effort method, and the repetition method. So the maximal effort method is going to be like your real heavy stuff. So typically in like a Westside split, and we'll kind of go over this into more detail, you would do 2 max effort days a week, 1 upper body and 1 lower body. Typically this is going to be in a 90% range for somewhere in between 1 to 6 sets. On average, usually 3 top singles. One of the things, again, talking with Matt Wenning in Ohio recently, and as he got older and he advanced in his career, he stuck more to 90% and left some in the tank. So the whole point of the max effort day really is to strain. There's going to be some max effort exercises which we would consider testers, and some exercises which we would consider builders. So for example, like a lot of times what we do in training, we might do like a reverse band or a slingshot set for our raw lifters, for example, and that would kind of be like our testing lift and kind of allow us to feel some heavy weight going into a competition. Someone like David Hoff, for example, I know he like will squat into chains going into a competition and he'll practice his attempts that way. So that you want to have some sort of, and I believe, and again, I haven't talked to him in a while, but learning from him and stuff, I know he'll do like an elevated deadlift off like a 1-inch mat or something like that. So everyone kind of has their indicator lifts. That's something you're going to have to play with a little bit. For both our raw and equipped lifters, we like to do, it would be different in the bencher, but for our raw and equipped lifters, we like to do reverse bands, and then for raw lifters, some like slingshot work, as well as kind of our indicator lifts going into like a peaking phase of a meet. There's going to be other exercises that are going to be more for building strength and less for testing strength. So depending on if you're going to be going, if you wanted to do more singles, so if you're going to do doing like the 3 to 6 single range, or if you're going to do doubles or triples, it's going to be maybe more sets and less reps. So you could do anywhere from again, if you're staying closer to 90% and not as much to 100%, you could do upwards of again 3, 4, 5, or 6 singles. So just to give you a couple of different examples. So you might do something like 6 sets of 1, could be a workout. Let's do this one. So if I'm going to do like 6 sets of 1, that might be closer like in a 90% range in a certain exercise, or 90% effort leaving something in the tank. You might do 5 sets of 2. in a similar range. Sometimes you might do 3 sets of 1. You might do 4 sets of 2. There's different variations. In general, we'll do a little bit more volume on upper body type lifting. You can usually generally handle a little bit more volume in sets and reps on like some sort of upper body or pressing movement. Some other things that we like to do for max effort work, especially for an equipped lifter, is something called like a Thompson style squat, or and we can apply the same logic to a deadlift and bench as well. So in a Thompson style squat, we're going to be, instead of adding actual bar weight, you may work up to like 80% of like straight weight for a certain movement, whether it be like a specialty bar or a straight bar. And then you're going to continue to add chains. That's a really great great way to do it for an equipped lifter. So for the modification I'll do for like a raw lifter is that instead of adding chain weight, we'll just add add straight weight, excuse me. So you do anywhere from like 3, 4, 5, or even up to 6 sets of 2 reps. When I first learned from Donnie, I think he would do like 5 sets of 2. And then he would just continue to add chains until he would work up to like a heavy double. So he'd get like about 5 working sets in. You could do a similar thing with, so if I'm working with a raw lifter, we would just add more straight weight, so there's at least some, a little bit more work on the bottom. So some examples of that, I'll use myself as an example. I did a max effort workout the other day. I worked up to, I think, 430 of bar weight. I started out with 80 pounds of chain. I continued to work up with chains, and then eventually we got up to, I think my last set was like 430 and like 280 pounds of chain. And I did that with the Spud Gateway Brief, so just like so there's a little support, so I can go a little wider. So that was a good workout for me. So that would be an example of a max effort workout. Again, the goal is to kind of strain, but still maintain good technique. Some differences for like raw and equipped lifting. So I'm going to give you some generalities, and obviously there's going to be some overlap. But in general, for like a raw lifter, for squatting especially, I would recommend for a raw lifter you can do more free squatting versus more box squatting. So in general, you're gonna, as a raw lifter, especially if you're a sleeved lifter, you're gonna do more free squats. You want to do more exercise that kind of emphasize more of the bottom end of the range of motion, typically. Again, if you're a raw with wraps lifter, there might be some, again, a little bit more overlap as far as lifts that work the top end of the range of motion, since you're getting that spring out of the bottom. But in general, if you have a more powerful start, you can have a more powerful finish, so it never really hurts to work kind of the bottom end of the range of motion. In general, you're going to want to do more close stance variations, so things like high bar squats and front squats and squats with heels, belt squatting with an upright posture, leg pressing. So things that are going to really hit your quads more, it's going to really help you out of the bottom. And you're going to do things that really, again, same kind of idea, things with more range of motion, so like deep high bar squats, deep front squats where you're kind of really squatting all the way down. That's going to be very beneficial for a raw lifter. In general, you're going to use less band and chain weight. For a raw lifter, I would really rarely go over 25%. So for example, let's say like, for a 400-pound squatter, it'd be rare that I would have them do more than 80 pounds of chain, for example. It might only, somewhere between 40 to 80 pounds of chain is probably plenty, so somewhere 10 to 20%. For an equipped lifter, that could be a lot more, because you're going to take into account, you're going to get some overload in the gear, you're going to get overload in wraps, so we're going to be a little bit more aggressive with the band tension or the chain weight. So when I'm training for when I'm usually doing raw stuff, even when I was squatting like 705, I would never really go past 120 pounds of chain personally. But like I mentioned before, now I'm training for an equipped meet, so I would sometimes I might even use 200, 240, 280 pounds of chain, for example. So for an equipped lifter, for max effort work, more box squats, and generally you can do things with more of a wide stance, so more ultra wide sumo deadlifts, ultra wide box squats, things like that. And generally you're going to do more stuff that's going to allow you to work the hips a lot more, so wide stance stuff is going to be really important. Not all the time, but in general, because you're using briefs, you're probably going to use exercises that have a little bit less range of motion. So you're maybe not going to go as super deep with like a box squat. Maybe it'll be a little bit of a higher of a box squat, like a parallel box. If you're doing belt squatting and things like that, you maybe use a little bit of a wider stance to work the hips a little bit more. You don't need to go like, butt to ankles on like a high bar squat or anything like that. In general, but again, no hard and fast rule. It's definitely going to be beneficial to do exercises with more range of motion as well. One of the things that we like to do a lot of times for max effort work, we would do like kind of Anderson squats from pins and Anderson good mornings from pins. So like starting from the bottom up, pin presses for bench and things like that. And those can be, again, beneficial, but in general, you're probably going to start at a higher point if you're an equipped lifter, and the lower point for a raw lifter if you're doing pin squats, pin presses, rack pulls and block pulls and things like that. Other considerations for max effort work with special bars. I think the safety squat bar is a great bar for both raw and equipped lifters. I think the Duffalo bar or like a cambered bar bench would be a little bit more beneficial to a raw lifter that needs to work off the bottom. All types of deficit deadlifts and stiff leg deadlifts I think are going to be great for both. And if you're going to do like higher block pulls and things, depending on your weak points for the deadlift, again, in general, the wider stance stuff is going to be better for an equipped lifter or like a sumo deadlifter. And I think conventional work can be beneficial for everything because a stronger back is going to be good. You can, in a traditional Westside system, you can use good mornings as a max effort movement. In general, we have done that in the past. If you are going to use good mornings as a max effort movement, usually we'll do like more to 3 to 5 rep range. And the only time we'd really do a single for a good morning would be for like an Anderson or like a pin good morning. That being said, I don't really recommend, I've kind of gone back and forth. I like to do more of good mornings for repetition work and kind of supplemental exercise. I don't go as heavy in them anymore. I was at my strongest. I was doing a good morning for like the cambered bar, like 600 pounds for 5 reps. I felt like I was just getting stronger in a bad position. So it did allow me to kind of recover from like kind of poor positions in my squats and things like that. But I didn't think it transferred over as well personally and with some of the lifters. So I think sometimes doing less is more with good mornings and stiff legs and things like that, and really keeping the technique and keeping a more arched back position. But depending on how you want to use the system, that is an option as well. For people that don't have a lot of muscle mass, you could also feel free to do a modified. So you could do a modified max effort method, and you could also do somewhere in like a 2 to 5 rep max on this day, especially if you need to kind of put more muscle on, doing more repetitions. So sometimes, even if more advanced people, it doesn't always have to be singles and doubles. It can be sets of 3 to 5. 5 is more rare, and 5 would be more for a beginning level lifter. So that being said, you're going to do it's going to be a sub-maximal effort. It's going to be a moderate or a lower percentage you're going to try to push the weight as fast as humanly possible, so that way you can have a very high force output. A lot of people neglect this method, and I think especially as you get more advanced, it becomes very, very important to do that. So, in general, I'm going to use some different examples for like a squat, a bench, and a deadlift. Okay. Depending on where you are in training, if you're trying to work a little bit more work capacity and stuff, you can do as high as many as even 20 sets, but it's going to be usually a lower percentage, and that's going to be early in training. It's going to be really more to build work capacity. Jesse Burt, when I was on my first weight loss journey, Jesse Burdick would have me do somewhere between 15 to 20 sets of 2 to 3 reps with very short rests, and that was a really good way to kind of build up capacity. So you can do that depending on, some people would call that like a lactic acid tolerance training phase and things like that. But in general, it's going to be more in like the 8 to 12 set range. So for like a squat in general, so on average, like you would do something like 10 sets of 2, and on average it's going to be somewhere between 55 and 65% of bar weight, and then somewhere between 10 to 25% of accommodating resistance. Okay. For the bench, on average, again, it could be upwards of 15 to 20 sets, but on average, it's usually more triples, and you could do, anywhere from like 1 to 3 or even 1 to 4 reps on a dynamic day, as long as you're keeping the good bar speed. On a bench press traditionally, you might do somewhere like 9 sets of 3, and same thing, somewhere from 50 to 65%. I know Louis in the past talked about just doing like a flat wave versus like a pendulum wave. We're going to talk more about like the training month and training week later, but in general, like over a course, if you're doing that dynamic effort cycle, you might start at like 50 or 55% and increase anywhere from 2.5 to 5% each week over like a 4 or 5 week period, and then kind of deload the intensity like again every 4 to 5 weeks. And again, somewhere between 10 to 25% band tension accommodating resistance. Okay. If you're a more advanced lifter and you want to work more of like strength, speed strength versus strength speed. So if you want to go a little bit more toward the speed end of the spectrum, that's like a weak point, or that's something you want to work on. I know Matt Wenning is really big on, like, he'll only use like 185 for his straight weight, but he'll do a lot of band tension, a lot of chains, and he'll start to actually add a combination of bands and chains into the equation. But he's trying to move really quickly, like as upwards of even 1 meter per second, which is extremely fast, which not everyone could do right away, but something you can kind of work towards over time. So again, for what was I saying? So yeah, for a lot of people, especially on the bench, they'll go like too heavy. I still like to actually pause my benches because I like to kind of practice how I play. You can do these ballistically, but again, I like to pause the benches in training, but have a quick descent. So you want to have a quick ascent, stabilize the weight, explode up. Deadlifts traditionally would be done with a little bit lower, so anywhere from like 6, usually on the low end, 6 to 8. So we'll say 8 singles. And again, this could be anywhere, and sometimes depending if you're using, this can be done with straight weight as well, but again, somewhere between 55% to 65%, and again, 10 to 25% combating resistance. Okay. If you want to use more band tension and less straight weight, you can certainly do that. You might use anywhere from even as low as 30%, but usually not lower. You could do like 30 to 40 or 40 to 50 if you're using a lot of chain weight or a lot of bands. Other things that you could do, and we'll kind of, depending on if you're a raw lifter or if you're maybe you don't, as I was saying, you can't flex bones. If you need a little bit more muscle mass, you could start off doing like more speed work and then kind of work into doing some heavier stuff just to get a little bit more heavier volume. So some things I like to do for that, I might do like something like 5 sets at 3, and we might do like 60 to 65% for that, and then we might go a little bit heavier, upwards of like 3 sets at 2 at 70%, and then again with the combating resistance. So we might do some workup sets after, and then you can do this for both raw and equipped. But especially for people that maybe they don't have the output to do like true speed work, doing some of those heavier workup sets after can allow them to get a little bit more volume in and help kind of build some muscle a little bit faster. So that could be like an example of like a squat progression. Sometimes on a bench, we might do 8 sets of 3, and we might, every 2 sets we might work up. So we might go 50, 55, 60, 65 within a given workout, and we continue to work up like that. For example, deadlift, same kind of deal, but we might just do like less reps, or we want to get, especially with the deadlift, I'll usually do a little bit less repetitions and more sets, because especially you want to practice breaking inertia and breaking the weight off the floor. So we might do like 6 sets of 2 at 65%, and then we might do 2 or 3 singles. So we'll say 2 singles at 75%. Just to get again a little extra work in and kind of work up a little bit. These are just off the top of my head some workouts that I've kind of programmed and planned in the past. The biggest difference between like the raw and equipped here, typically for the equipped lifter, it's most of the time we'll do the dynamic day raw. If you are kind of beat up, using like a loose brief can be effective, or Spud Inc. now sells these gateway briefs, which I've been using. They're fantastic. They're really not, they don't really give you much at all, but they allow you to get a little bit wider and kind of practice the same positions you're going to be in the suit. So the big difference here for like the raw versus the equipped, we might do like a gateway brief or raw. So obviously if you're doing your speed work raw, you might have to use a little bit lower percentage, so closer to 40% or 30%, but maybe a little bit more aggressive with the chain or combination. So maybe you're using 25, 30, even 35%. So a little bit more chain weight, a little bit like less bar weight for the equipped lifter. So you can kind of really learn to accelerate. So that's going to be your real heavy bands, a lot of chain weight for here. So that's going to be the differences between raw and equipped for the dynamic effort training. In general, you're going to have 2 days that are dedicated to speed, 1 upper body day and 1 lower body day. Typically you will use some sort of bench press variation. You could do like a floor press, something like that as well. The other thing that you'll do for squat, usually you do your dynamic squats first, followed by a dynamic deadlift as well. The other thing I just want to kind of cover, that I know that Louis is doing also too, he's doing like more 5x5s for the squat as well. So you could also do a volume day if you feel like you need more muscle in place of the speed day. You could do the same thing kind of for like a bench press as well. So you can kind of mix that in or kind of do that. You could do waves of 5x5 and kind of do a similar, but the percentage is going to be a little bit higher. And I know like sometimes that might be straight weight. I know something that David, I would apologize if I'm butchering your name, David Jenkinson, he's just recently broke the 242 record at Westside. He's pulled 890. He's very, very elite lifter. He's been competing against my friend Chris De La Fave, so they've been kind of going back and forth, which has been fun. So I know he likes to do like a 5x5, actually a deficit deadlift. So he'll do like, may do his speed squats, and then he'll do like a deficit deadlift as well, and kind of work that up into a progression. So that's worked really well for him. He's a very strong deadlifter, obviously. So something to consider when you're kind of breaking up the week as well. Again, in general, for like the raw stuff, it's going to be more free squats and not so much box squatting on a dynamic day. Personally, for me, just so they practice that groove a little bit. Usually a little bit closer stance. For the equipped lifters, it's going to be more box squatting and things like that. So something to consider. Last method is the repetition effort method. So this is going to be, obviously the effort's going to be like usually under 80%. There's a couple different ways. So usually this is for either your supplemental exercises, but mostly it's going to be for your accessory work, okay? So you can obviously just do like your sets and reps. In general, it's going to be higher reps, at least 5, but upwards of like 8 to 12, even upwards of 20 reps. The other thing that you could do is also just work a total volume. This is something that Jesse Burdick had me do a lot, so he might say like you might have to do 80 band pull-aparts or 100 band pull-aparts or 150 tricep extensions. So and you try to build up that volume over time with a similar weight and try to get more volume at a certain weight. And he'll also might say something like, I want you to do 80 reps in as few sets as possible. So maybe you have to do 80 push-ups, or you have to do like 50 pull-ups. Try to get that volume in as few sets as possible. So in general, the repetition effort is going to be close to failure. So you're really trying to kind of go for more of that muscle pump, more like a bodybuilder type feel, help kind of build muscle, build work capacity, and kind of build up individual weaknesses, bring up those weak points. So it's going to be done close to failure. You can also do time sets. Something like, Donnie, this could be with isometrics or actual dynamic contractions. Louis Simmons will talk about like doing a timed bench press. He might bench press 50 pounds for like a minute. You could adjust the tempo. You could do this quick. You could do it fast. In general, it's going to be a slower tempo when you do the time set to really kind of build up that capacity and build up that time under tension. Really great for bodybuilding techniques. Again, it could be done with isometric contractions like a plank or isometric row holds and things like that, flex arm hangs, which we do a lot of. Or you could actually do triceps for a minute. And what you could do is over the course of a month, you could either increase the time or you could try to get more reps in the same time frame. And so you kind of could break those records over time. But the name of the game here is just accumulate volume over time. These are usually single joint or smaller exercises where you're doing more machines, dumbbells, kettlebells, but it could be done with a barbell as well. But in general, this is going to be more of your dumbbells, bands, lower impact exercises, maybe like your belt squats and things like that. So usually for the raw lifter, depending on your strengths and weaknesses, but in general, I know I've kind of been guilty of this, especially in the strength and conditioning world. We're always taught like glutes, hamstrings, posterior chain, but as a power lifter, especially for the raw bench, especially for the raw squat, your anterior chain is also super important, and we don't want to neglect that. So the muscles of your chest and your shoulders are going to really help the bottom of your bench press. Your quadriceps, your core, your hip flexors are going to be really important for a raw squat and raw deadlift. Not to say that, so you need to have a balance of anterior and posterior chain. You can't just only work your posterior chain. In general, for health, longevity, and everything else, I would tend to agree, but I think that we've kind of beaten to death too much that we get like too posterior chain crazy. I know we all like want a nice peach and things like that. We want to jump higher and all these things, but in general, for a big raw squat and a big raw bench, we don't want to neglect our quads and we don't want to neglect our chest. So don't forget to work your anterior chain, especially if you're a raw lifter. That's a big mistake. I don't think it's as big a mistake anymore now that the raw lifting has, but that was a big mistake that I kind of noticed with myself. When I started kind of competing, because I've been kind of bouncing back between raw and equipped, and I noticed that my quads and my chest were definitely like the weak points because I was spending so much time on my posterior chain. Now that being said, as an equipped lifter, you don't want to neglect your anterior chain, but in general, especially as you get closer to a contest, it's really going to be the glutes, the hamstrings, the upper back. Those things are going to be the limiting factor, and those are going to be your key players. So you're going to have a little bit more emphasis on your posterior chain, your hips, your abductors, especially if you're going wider, if you have a wider stand squat, a sumo deadlift. Those methods are going to be really important, those types of exercises. So you're going to have a little bit more emphasis on the backside. They say bigger back, bigger total, and I totally agree. And that is especially true for like the raw lifter. For the equipped lifter, but all lifters in general. So if you're a raw lifter, make sure you don't neglect the front side of your body, have a good balance. If you're an equipped lifter, you're probably going to, as you get closer to a contest, don't worry so much about the muscles you can see in the mirror. That's not going to necessarily translate as well. Really focus on the posterior chain, and that's going to serve you well. That kind of concludes our first kind of Westside style video. This is a general overview for like exercise selection and the general methodology. Next week I'm going to kind of go over like a training week and what that looks like, and maybe also like potentially like some different cycles in a training month. I'll go into a little bit detail on that. If you guys want more programming information, just let me know. Whether this style of program may or may not be appropriate to you. One thing I thought, I remember Eddie Cohen said many years ago is, as we kind of get older, we tend to revert back to how we used to train when we were younger. And I feel like as I'm advancing in my training age, I'm starting to swing more and more back to the Westside stuff because it's kind of what I was always comfortable with and what I enjoy doing. So who knows, maybe I'll start to kind of, our programming and my own workouts will start to kind of shift a little bit more toward that kind of old school Westside style. And again, if you're not at Westside, you're not training Westside, but I would say this is Westside style, and just some different kind of concurrent and conjugate principles that we find. And just so you know, again, the whole idea of concurrent is that we're trying to raise multiple quality strength, speed, hypertrophy, or strength, speed, work capacity. We're trying to raise these qualities all at the same time. And that's kind of the benefit of this style of training. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please subscribe, and for future updates, check out the links below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.